At Château de Brissac, one of France's most enduring ghost stories is attached to a woman whose face is said to be green, whose presence is reported in the castle's tower, and whose cries allegedly pass through the stone. She is known as the Green Lady. Behind that apparition lies a documented marriage, a violent family story, and a murder traditionally dated to 1477. Yet the distance between history and haunting is difficult to measure. The chateau stands in Brissac, in the French region of Anjou, a place shaped by the rivalries, marriages, and inherited power of medieval noble families. Its walls belong to a long architectural history, but the legend gives those walls a more intimate darkness. According to tradition, the Green Lady is Charlotte de Brézé, wife of Jacques de Brézé. Her alleged fate transformed a private scandal into a supernatural identity that survived for centuries. Charlotte de Brézé belonged to a powerful, aristocratic world in which marriage was rarely only a personal arrangement. Noble unions joined families, property, influence, and political expectation. Jacques de Brézé held an important position within that world, and Charlotte's marriage placed her inside a household where reputation mattered profoundly. The surviving historical framework confirms the marriage. The most dramatic details belong to a story repeatedly reshaped by later retelling. The traditional account says that in 1477, Jacques discovered Charlotte with a lover. The tale continues with murder. Jacques is said to have killed both of them. This is the central event from which the haunting grows. It should not be treated as an unchanged transcript of the past. The broad story has become inseparable from its legend, while the precise circumstances remain obscured by the centuries between the reported crime and the ghostly claims. That uncertainty is not a weakness in the story, it is the source of its power. A confirmed marriage stands beside an alleged betrayal, and a remembered murder stands beside details that cannot be securely separated from folklore. The castle does not offer a simple historical verdict. Instead, it preserves an unresolved tension between what can be placed within the record and what later generations felt compelled to add. In the legend, Charlotte does not disappear completely after death. She returns as a figure associated with the chateau, particularly its tower. Reports describe a woman with a green face, an image as disturbing as it is strangely specific. Other accounts speak of moans or cries heard within the castle. These claims are presented as reported experiences, not proof of a spirit. Their importance lies in the way they give physical form to an old act of violence. A ghost story needs more than a death. It needs a place where the past can seem to remain. The tower provides that place. High, enclosed, and separated from ordinary movement, it becomes the natural center of the legend. Sound can travel unpredictably through old masonry, and shadow can alter a familiar face, but such explanations do not erase the emotional force of the tale. They only reveal how architecture can collaborate with memory. The color green deepens the apparition's strangeness. It marks Charlotte not merely as a dead woman, but as something visibly altered by death and time. Whether the image began as a description, a symbol, or a later embellishment cannot be established with certainty. Green suggests decay, sickness, and unnatural change. It turns a woman from a distant historical narrative into a face that witnesses are said to recognize. There is also a cruel irony in the title Green Lady. The name sounds almost formal, as though the castle has granted Charlotte a permanent rank. Yet it may represent the final reduction of a complex person into a single haunting feature. Her marriage, status, and individual life recede behind the color of the face. Folklore often preserves the outline of a person while stripping away everything that made that person fully human. The story's emotional center is therefore not simply the alleged murder. It is the conversion of a private tragedy into a public legend. Charlotte becomes a case study in how historical violence is remembered. A marriage becomes betrayal. Betrayal becomes murder. Murder becomes a cry in the tower. Each retelling carries the event farther from its original circumstances, while making the resulting ghost more vivid. Jacques de Brézé occupies a troubling position in this transformation. In the historical account, he is a husband and nobleman connected to Charlotte. In the legend, he becomes the discoverer, judge, and killer within a single dramatic sequence. That role gives the story its stark moral structure, but it also warns us to be cautious. Medieval history is frequently compressed into memorable scenes, especially when later audiences seek motives that official records leave incomplete. The year 1477 gives the narrative an anchor. A date makes the legend feel fixed, almost judicially precise. It suggests that the castle can be linked to one night, one discovery, and one irreversible act, yet a date alone does not verify every detail attached to it. It tells us when the traditional story places the murder, not necessarily how the event unfolded or how quickly the ghostly interpretation emerged. That distinction matters because haunted places are built from layers. The oldest layer may be a family record. Another may be a political memory. Later layers can include local storytelling, repeated descriptions, and accounts from people who claim to have heard or seen something unusual. By the time Charlotte is called the Green Lady, the legend has become an inheritance, passed from one generation to the next, like a dark property attached to the chateau. Within the castle, the story gains force through repetition. A moan heard in an old building may have many possible causes. A face glimpsed in dim light may be shaped by expectation. But someone who already knows Charlotte's legend does not enter the tower as a neutral observer. The mind supplies a pattern before the senses have finished interpreting what they encounter. This does not make every witness dishonest. It makes perception part of the mystery. Fear is often cumulative rather than sudden. The first report creates a possibility. The second gives it a shape. The third turns that shape into tradition. In this way, the Green Lady can seem increasingly present even when the evidence remains fragmentary. Her story is strengthened not by a single conclusive manifestation, but by the persistence of a recognizable pattern: the tower, the cries, the green face, and the remembered violence of 1477. The alleged sounds are especially important. A visual apparition can be dismissed as shadow, reflection, or imagination, but a cry appears to emerge from the building itself. It seems to make the stone speak. Reports of moans connected to Charlotte give the legend an auditory dimension, suggesting that the castle does not merely contain her image but continues to carry her distress. The sound, whether natural or supernatural, becomes a form of historical afterlife. Yet the reported haunting is not a direct window into Charlotte's thoughts. No surviving voice can establish what she felt, what happened in the room, or whether the traditional account accurately describes her death. The cries belong to the legend's interpretation of her. They express the emotional logic of the story. A woman betrayed, discovered, and violently silenced, returning through the architecture that supposedly witnessed the crime. The chateau's endurance also changes the meaning of the tale. Generations have lived with the same walls, while names, customs, and political arrangements have altered around them. A building can outlast the people who created its reputation. Each period inherits a different version of the past, and each version selects what seems most significant. At Brissac, the murder story became the key through which many listeners approached the castle's older and broader history. That process is common in folklore, but here it feels unusually concentrated. One woman, one husband, one alleged lover, one tower, and one color provide the legend with a complete vocabulary of dread. Nothing needs to be added for the story to remain memorable. The simplicity is precisely what allows it to travel. Listeners may forget dates or family connections, but the image of the Green Lady remains. The legend also reflects the dangers imposed on women within aristocratic societies governed by honor and control. Charlotte is remembered through an accusation of infidelity and the violence that allegedly followed. Her own perspective is largely absent. This absence creates an unsettling silence at the heart of the story. The ghost may be imagined as a restless victim, but history leaves us uncertain about the woman behind the apparition. Jacques, meanwhile, is preserved through the act attributed to him. The alleged murder defines his place in the narrative more completely than the surviving outline of his life. This is another transformation produced by legend. A historical person becomes a character, and a complicated household becomes a scene of betrayal. The supernatural tale does not merely preserve the past. It edits the past, selecting violence as its most durable truth. Claims connected to the Green Lady should therefore be approached with two forms of attention. One listens for what the reports actually say: a figure seen, a moan heard, a presence associated with the tower. The other listens for what the reports reveal about human memory, They show how people interpret unfamiliar sensations through inherited stories, and how a location's identity can influence what visitors expect to find there. Neither approach entirely dissolves the mystery. Natural explanations may account for sound, light, or mistaken recognition, but they do not explain why this particular image has endured. Historical caution may separate records from legend, but it cannot remove the sorrow attached to the story. The uncertainty remains suspended between evidence and imagination, where the most persistent hauntings often reside. What makes Château de Brissac unsettling is not the claim that a ghost has been proven. It is the possibility that a real conflict, a real marriage, and a remembered act of violence supplied the raw material for a presence that later generations could feel. Charlotte de Brézé may be unreachable behind the legend. The Green Lady, however, continues to move through it, carrying the unresolved burden of 1477. In the end, the history behind the Green Lady is neither a simple ghost story nor a fully recoverable crime. It is the record of how a woman named Charlotte became attached to a chateau, how Jacques de Brézé became linked to an alleged murder, and how time gave that tragedy a green face and a voice in the tower. The castle's deepest shadow may be the distance between what happened and what people can never stop imagining happened.